Greetings and salutations. A little while ago, I decided to try a bit of speculative biology just for fun. The response was quite positive, and I appreciate all of you who took the time to watch, like, and comment. Based upon these comments, I figured it might be worth trying something like this again. So, let us pay another visit to the Tulgey Wood. For today's venture, I will be relying in part upon the journal entries of a recent visitor to the largest known Tulgey Wood. This visitor, who wishes to remain anonymous, has been kind enough to lend selected pages of their journal. I believe there is no risk in saying that this intrepid individual was an aspiring apothecary and had visited this liminal biome in search of novel medicinal compounds. It should be no great surprise that their travels did not go quite as expected. First entry. Arrived at the boundary region today. Spoke briefly with one of the watchwardens. Received the customary warnings and caveats. Upon inquiry about the mood of the forest, I was answered with a dubious look at first. Apparently this particular warden was relatively new to the job. A more experienced colleague approached with a more satisfactory answer. The forest appeared to be in a growth phase, with the border pressing outward on normal reality. This was likely to last another month or two before the inevitable ebb. The current season was late brillig, and the Wabes were already fading back into the earth. The toves would be sluggish, and temperatures might be a bit brisk. There had been no Jabberwock reports in recent days, and this came as no small relief. After a quick check of identity, I was waved onward without further incident. I saw the light change, and felt the world become pleasantly blurred at the edges. I was well and truly entering a Tulgey Wood at long last. My first order of business would be to either find a settlement or a suitable tum-tum tree and make camp for the night. After that, my real business in this place can begin. Settlements in a Tulgey Wood are surprisingly limited in their scope. No known village numbers more than 100 people, and more than half of the documented human populace lives in isolated cabins of various sorts. Both the villages and the cabins appear to be oddly integrated with the surrounding forest, with living trees forming a substantial part of many of the overall structures. Building materials are almost entirely restricted to various sorts of wood, while stone or metal are generally rare. When asked about this, the most a resident is likely to say is that wood just feels more cozy somehow. Then they will often launch into a friendly diatribe about the pleasant features of their personal domicile. There is an unusually high proportion of introverts among the residents of Tulgey Woods. While they do not often seek out human company, they do maintain strong connections with other settlements within walking distance. A number of local festivals afford a pretext for gatherings, where most of the more practical business of trade and news are seen to. People are friendly with their neighbors, but less than trusting with outsiders. Still, they are generally pleasant enough, if prone to a few pranks now and then. Second entry. The people in this forest are insane. Thankfully, it is not a malevolent insanity, or so I hope, but it is still very tiring. They'll shelter you for the night without any demands for payment, and chat away the late hours, freely sharing all they know about the surrounding patch of forest. Then, the next morning, they'll send you off with a fond farewell, and leave a shiny bauble suspended from your rucksack to attract a few curious toves. I'm still amazed I didn't get stung. No matter, after sifting through all of the anecdotes and amusing tales, I have managed to pick out a few useful details. There is a tumbledown somewhere nearby. Given the directions from the last few residents, I believe I can ascertain the approximate location. Of course, it is a little more difficult, given these directions are all about avoiding the place. Still, if I turn right wherever they said to turn left, and go on past any landmark they said to turn back from, I should eventually find the place. There are a number of ruins scattered through all of the known Tulgey Woods, though there are as yet no satisfactory explanations for any of them. These ruins are commonly known as tumbledowns by the local residents, and they consist mainly of weathered stone half swallowed by the surrounding vegetation. The scope of such ruins is fairly grandiose in some cases, suggesting a highly advanced civilization. The fact that they are made of stone is a point of some interest, as such a building material is generally avoided by current residents. The tumbledowns are often visited or inhabited by some of the larger, more predatory forms of life within Tulgey Woods. This makes them largely avoided by locals, and most guides will outright refuse to lead a visitor to such locations. A great many archaeological expeditions have been hindered by this odd reticence. However, there are a few locals that will actually seek out the occasional tumbledown in search of a particular sort of treasure. There are a number of forms of life that are all but exclusive to these forgotten piles of stone. Third entry. It has been hectic these past few days, so I shall need to at least summarize the missing entries. Foremost, at long last, I have located the tumbledown. It is not an especially large or expansive ruin, but it has proven suitable nonetheless. There was even a large tum-tum tree close by, so I was able to make camp on one of its larger branches without any serious issues. Even so, it was unnerving to see a knot of young bandersnatches wander by a short time after sunset. They didn't appear to notice me, thankfully, but even if they had, I believe I was sufficiently out of reach. The following morning, I began to properly explore the tumbledown. A part of this particular ruin was on a hill, and the highest stones were above the forest canopy. I managed to find a way up just a little after sunrise. The view was breathtaking, but my eyes were soon elsewhere. Among the broken rocks, I found the thing I had been searching for, a promising patch of plants with distinctive crimson foliage. With luck, at least some of these are proper specimens of Scrivenwort. I shall need to conduct a few tests, but that must wait until I am back in safer territory. One of the most prized medicinal plants in a Tulgey Wood is the Scrivenwort. By all available accounts, it only grows among the stones of tumbledowns. All efforts at cultivation elsewhere have failed thus far. If anything does grow, it is lacking in the distinctive properties that make the plant so highly sought after. To begin with, it is worth taking the time to describe the species. It is a small plant with relatively large leaves, patterned in hues of crimson and burgundy. The veins are comparatively pale, providing a sharp contrast. To some eyes, these veins appear to take on shapes reminiscent of written language. No coherent words have been described as yet, though. This phantom writing is believed to be the basis of the name Scrivenwort, which roughly translates into scribe plant. However, this name does have another possible origin. The leaves can be dried and used to make a fairly pungent tea. Alternatively, they might be crushed and blended with some variety of suitable foodstuff. Regardless of the precise mechanism, when ingested, Scrivenwort is said to greatly improve mental function, particularly in a linguistic sense. It sharpens the mind and clarifies memory, and grants a remarkable sense of erudition for a few days at least. Thus far, nobody has managed to figure out exactly why or how this particular medicine works. There are those who believe that it is in fact a dangerous stimulant, something vaguely akin to caffeine, which merely simulates an increased mental capacity. That, or temporarily provides an enhancement while debilitating the mind for a time afterward in an inevitable crash. However, Tulgey Wood residents claim there are no such ill effects. The mental boost is temporary, but they claim there is no particular malaise afterward. Still, there are rumors of ill effects from overly frequent use or excessive dosages. The overall situation is lacking in proper evidence to begin with. Things are further obfuscated by the presence of a close cousin of Scrivenwort. This plant has a very similar appearance, with only experts being able to distinguish properly between the two. However, the effects are surprisingly different. It does increase mental function and awareness, but this is accompanied by a worrisome sort of instability and a chaotic emotional state. In sufficiently large doses, it appears to impair language areas in the brain, leading a person to speak and write in a torrent of incomprehensible nonsense. Thus, the poisonous little plant is most often known as Gibberwort. Strangely enough, Gibberwort might be even more sought after than Scrivenwort. It offers a sense of euphoria and detachment when taken in small doses, apparently functioning as a form of stress relief. Side effects are mitigated by changing the method of delivery. Rather than ingestion, as with Scrivenwort, medicinal doses of Gibberwort tend to be smoked. The scent is rather distinctive, and it is not uncommon to encounter it in various settlements. Like the Scrivenwort, Gibberwort is only known to grow among the various tumbledowns. Its prevalence should give some insight into how much the Tulgey Wood residents actually avoid these ruins. At the very least, a small subset of the population must pay regular visits in search of these valuable herbs. Fourth entry. Looking back on the past few days is a bit of a blur. Probably better I should forget most of it. Yesterday's entry is perhaps some of the most inane scribbling I have ever had the misfortune to set my eyes upon. Thankfully, the toxin appears to be largely flushed out of my system at this point. On the bright side, I believe I have figured out the difference between Gibberwort and Scrivenwort. It involves a subtle difference in the dentition pattern at the leaf margins, that and a slightly greater glossiness of the upper leaf surfaces. Also, when lightly crushed, Scrivenwort has a hint of clove in its scent, while Gibberwort is more reminiscent of nutmeg. Fortunately, I still have a fair amount of both sorts of leaf. They are currently drying, suspended from a few bits of string in the window. I am fortunate that the innkeeper is so untroubled about her tenants. Then again, it seems like everybody in this little village is oddly untroubled. They seem almost ridiculously lackadaisical most of the time. About the only passion or interest I've seen is when they gather in the main room below at night and tell stories to one another. Tulgey Wood residents all love their stories, or so it would appear. A few of the older folks have expressed an interest in purchasing some of the Gibberwort leaves I have acquired. Offers have been a motley sort, including little hand-carved wooden charms, scraps of poetry written on papery bark, pressed flowers, bags of high-quality tum-tum tea, and even a long knitted scarf. Perhaps I can use at least some of these offers to trade at the next village. With any luck, I might even manage to gain the services of a reliable guide. Every healthy forest has its share of larger herbivores, and one of the more common in a Tulgey Wood is a creature known as the Blumbergraft. It is an ungainly sort of thing, with features reminiscent of something between an elk and a bear. The creature has an unkempt sort of appearance, as its long fur is easily tangled and tends to pick up debris. A few of the smaller bird species are known to make nests in the carpet of ample, shaggy fur on its back. In local folk tales, it often takes on the role of a disinterested bureaucrat or an overly officious sort of authority figure. Rarely, if ever, is the creature depicted in a positive light. The untidy and heavy-set appearance belies a surprising strength and agility. Thankfully, these creatures are not especially aggressive for most of the year. However, they can be quite easily provoked during their rutting season in late Brillig. They will also attack if startled, and they are regrettably single-minded in their pursuits. They have been known to prolong a chase for hours in some cases. Thankfully, they are not especially swift, and they are not capable of climbing trees. Fifth entry. I hate Blumbergrafts. I didn't before I came to this forest. I didn't even hate them this morning. As I write, I am currently sheltering up a tree, waiting for the miserable creature to move off. The sun is going down, and there is no suitable place nearby to make camp. I might as well write a little more while there is enough light, and I'm stuck waiting anyway. I found a clearing late this afternoon on my way to the nearest settlement. It was a little off to the side of the main path. I was just putting some promising toadstool samples into one of my vials when I heard a horrible screeching, hooting sort of sound. When I looked up, I saw this immense beast charging straight towards me. Naturally, I ran the other way. I even gained some ground on the thing, but I could still hear it crashing along behind me. I'm in reasonably good health, but I felt myself getting tired after the first few 100 yards, so I looked for a suitable tree to climb. I've been up here ever since. No tum-tum trees are in sight in any direction. The land here is hilly enough I can't see any villages either. Not sure where I am or which way to go. I can still see that detestable lummox below, munching idly on a bit of foliage for the moment. The Candlemoth is one of the more entrancing creatures found in a Tulgey Wood. It is a bioluminescent insect of considerable size. The wing beats tend to cause a wavering light level while the moth is in flight, giving the impression of a flickering candle moving among the trees. This is often a rather eerie sight, and has no doubt led to a certain amount of superstition around the species. They are not unwelcome, but it is considered bad luck to seek one out. It is even worse luck to harm one. Their appearance is often regarded as an omen of some sort or another, though the interpretation is quite variable. An odd habit of the Candlemoth is its tendency to visit graves. Whenever a grave is dug, one or more Candlemoths are expected to visit within a matter of days. Because of this, the occasional lost soul in the forest might try following a Candlemoth in the hopes it might be traveling towards a settlement. Results of this gamble are varied according to available accounts. This somewhat morbid habit has formed the basis of many Candlemoth superstitions. Some Tulgey Wood residents regard these moths as the souls of the departed and give them a sort of quiet deference. Others consider them to be psychopomps, serving as guides to the afterlife. 6th entry. I'm tired, but it's worth writing this much down. By the time the Blumbergraft departed, it was well and truly dark. There was enough light for navigation coming from the various fungal patches, and eventually I found my way to a path. A short while later, I was at a crossroads. It was then that I saw the flickering light down one of the possible routes. A Candlemoth of all things. I followed as it began to flutter away, keeping pace as it moved along the path. Much to my relief, it wasn't all that long before I came across a village. Not the one I'd intended to visit, but still a welcome sight. There was a room available at the inn, perhaps the only room it had for guests. From the window, I saw the Candlemoth resting in the nearby graveyard. It looked as though one of the graves had been only recently dug. Death happens in a Tulgey Wood much as it does in any other forest. Sometimes it is the animals that perish, and sometimes it is the plants. Predators take their toll, and the occasional storm will fell an aging tree. Given the abundance of fungal growth in a Tulgey Wood, one might well expect any animal or plant remains to quickly return to the soil. Indeed, one can often recognize a place where something has recently died by the abundant presence of red toadstools. It appears that this coloration is taken on by multiple species of local fungus. It is sometimes referred to as a crimson wabe or a blooded wabe. Strangely enough, this phenomenon appears to occur for fallen trees as well as animal corpses. The fungal growths found in and around village cemeteries also tend to have a reddish hue, though it is not nearly so vivid and the growth is not so pronounced. The more superstitious locals aver that such fungal growth is connected with death itself rather than the nutritional qualities of the deceased. In actuality, the phenomenon may be caused by the actions of a rather cryptic creature that is known for its distinctly morbid habits. This little undertaker is known as the Gravenwyrm. It is a pale, boneless sort of thing with a head that appears to be little more than a mass of tentacles. Hidden in the midst of these tentacles is a mouth adorned with remarkably sharp, sturdy teeth. These can make short work of even the toughest materials. 2 sturdy claws lie just behind the head, and several smaller pairs of limbs are further back along the body. Gravenwyrms are burrowers for the most part. They will climb to the surface under certain circumstances, though they tend to avoid daylight. What makes these creatures particularly unusual is their range of diet and their range of sizes. They will consume any dead material, whether it is a fallen tree or an animal's skeleton. Such dietary flexibility is remarkably unusual and probably only possible within a liminal biome. Normal biochemistry can be stretched in such a place in ways that run contrary to established, sensible rules. As for the matter of size, this is perhaps even more unusual. Most Gravenwyrms are the size of insects, and they burrow through dead wood and other materials much as a colony of termites would do. However, there are often at least a few larger specimens among the gathering. It isn't uncommon to find a Gravenwyrm that is the size of something like a large rat or even a house cat. The most extreme accounts report creatures approaching the size of an adult human, though this is extremely rare if it is even accurate. 7th entry. I asked for this. Silly of me, but I did ask. I should take a moment to explain. Yesterday morning, when I woke up in the village, I asked around for a guide. There was only a single volunteer, a somewhat sullen young woman who goes by the name of Charlotte, probably a pseudonym, as is local custom for most guides in Tulgey Woods. She asked why I was looking for a guide. Unwilling to give her a full answer, I simply told her that I wanted to see something of the real Tulgey Wood behind all the whimsical tales I'd heard and read. Not sure if she believed me, but she seemed satisfied. I was able to hire her for a couple of the knickknacks I'd previously acquired for a few Gibberwort leaves. She led me deeper into the forest than I think most people go. The air felt heavy and oddly perfumed. Soon this perfume was tainted by the scent of death. We stepped out into a small clearing, dominated by the colossal remains of a fallen tree. All around this decaying titan there was a profusion of large toadstools the color of fresh blood. Something about the sight disturbed me more than I would care to admit. This was not the most disturbing aspect, though. At the edge of this fungal patch was the corpse of a large animal, chewed down to little more than an untidy mess of bones. I believe it had once been a Blumbergraft. If so, I felt no great sorrow at its passing. When I asked why she'd brought me to this place, Charlotte answered I would see something of the real Tulgey Wood quite soon. With that, she nodded over to the nearby forest. I could see the large crown of a tum-tum tree overtopping the surrounding rust-vine oaks. That was to be our campsite for the night. We camped without incident, though I heard some rather disquieting crunching noises coming from the clearing. When the sun was nearly up, I was all but pushed out of the tree and led back to the clearing. There I saw a most unnerving sight. A pale, eldritch creature was feeding on the skeletal remains. I have no desire to draw the thing, but I recognized it as a Gravenwyrm from my studies. Charlotte and I watched as it slowly devoured a broken rib before slithering and squelching through the red toadstools. The creature bonelessly squeezed itself into a gap between the roots at the base of the fallen tree's stump, vanishing from sight. When it was gone, and as the first daylight struck me, Charlotte asked whether I still wanted to see more of the real Tulgey Wood. When I said yes, she looked surprised. Only for a moment, though. We've traveled all day since then, and I'm only writing this as she's busy with the evening meal. I've been promised another strange sight when darkness properly descends. Due to the impressive research efforts of recent years, the natural history of the Gravenwyrm has had some rather disturbing light thrown upon it. These scavengers are only ever found feeding on the remains of plants and animals, and they are most often located underground. Larger specimens will go so far as to partially bury remains that they are currently feeding upon. A few salient points of interest have been revealed by the more recent studies. See the Ashton and Wingate papers for further details. To begin with, the mechanism of the varied digestive abilities appears to be a fungal symbiont located within their digestive systems. There is speculation that this distinctive fungal species might be the cause of the red coloration induced in associated mushroom patches, but there is a more disturbing revelation in the research. Preliminary analysis shows this symbiont to be the same fungus that causes frume rot and induces the frumious state in adult bandersnatches. It is possible that they attain this state by feeding on Gravenwyrms when they are mature enough to tolerate the fungal toxins. For all other creatures, the fungus is dangerous enough to keep the Gravenwyrms from being preyed upon. Even a Jabberwock seems unwilling to trouble them. That said, they are frequently devoured as a part of their life cycle. Gravenwyrms begin as eggs laid near available food supplies. They hatch, feed, and grow much as a typical insect larva might. Depending upon the size of the meal, they can grow to considerable sizes themselves. Beyond this, they reproduce by a sort of parthenogenesis, wherein each Gravenwyrm gives birth to a series of clones of itself. This is an especially messy, disturbing sort of birth, though, as the offspring collectively devour their mother in the process. The less said about the details, the better. These cannibal tendencies continue later on in life, particularly as the available food supply begins to run out. At this point, the largest Gravenwyrms in a colony will begin to feed upon their smaller compatriots. By the end, only a single large creature remains. At this point, any dead material in the area has been devoured and metabolized. The solitary survivor dies and begins to rapidly putrefy as the frume rot proliferates, dissolving its body away. However, a number of unusual cysts are left behind. As the fungus deteriorates into the surrounding soil, these cysts open and their inhabitants emerge. This takes place over several days, or rather, several nights. These unexpected offspring of the final Gravenwyrm open their wings and take on a bioluminescent shine. One by one, a new generation of Candlemoths takes to the air, seeking out new feeding grounds to lay their eggs in. 8th entry. Charlotte led me to an especially luxuriant fungal patch just after dark. She explained that she found a fallen tree in the final stages of decomposition a short while ago. The Gravenwyrms had died, so she said, and their children were set to enter the world. I watched, rather awestruck, as a few Candlemoths appeared, hatching out of dark, leathery objects that bore a superficial resemblance to large eggs. As these luminous creatures fluttered off into the forest, she explained the connection between the Gravenwyrms and the Candlemoths. Apparently, this is a closely kept secret among certain inhabitants of the Tulgey Wood. When I asked why this secret was so closely guarded, she asked if I recalled the moth that had led me into the village. She then asked where I had seen it rest. She didn't need to say any more, and I'm sure I looked quite troubled by the implications. Perhaps nobody rests all that easy in these woods, even in a hallowed grave. She then asked almost mockingly whether I wanted to see more of the true Tulgey Wood. I asked her, perhaps a bit curtly, if she would dispense with such games and simply lead me into the true depths, the eldritch boundary where the Tulgey Wood bleeds into whatever mad dimension lies at its far border. She smiled, somewhat to my surprise, and said she would. She then went so far as to say it had taken me quite long enough to ask.